Welcome to Buffalo Pregame, your source for live Buffalo football discussion, news, analysis, opinions, and more. Presented by ASM Publications and Bills Digest. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Buffalo Pregame. I'm your host, Alex Brasky, here for Bills Digest and ASM Publications. On today's show, we will be joined by two special guests. First, we'll be joined by Josh Reed, sports director of WIVB Channel 4 in Buffalo and host of Bills Kickoff Live. Name change there, a little bit of a brand change for Josh. Wanted to get the right plug in. And also, we'll be joined by Aaron Quinn of Cover One, as Bills training camp is almost upon us. It begins on Wednesday. And boy, a lot of excitement surrounding training camp. This is really the start of the true league year when the teams are all together on the practice field for the first time, whether it be at their home stadiums or whether it be like the Bills, they travel to a surrounding university, about an hour and a half away in Pittsford, New York. And they'll battle it out on the practice field. We'll see who wins the few positional battles for the Bills over the next few weeks and leading into the preseason. But it's pretty much status quo for the Bills at this point, up and down the roster. You look at cornerback 2, you look at the safety position, and you look at really the back half of the wide receiver position and even the defensive line as storylines heading into training camp. But cornerback 2 and safety, really the only two starting jobs up for grabs at this point with training camp, like I said, just days away. Each week on Buffalo Pregame, I'll provide updates on the NFL, NHL, and more via daily articles, podcasts, videos, and more. Please subscribe to Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, along with the Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky Substack, both of which free of charge. All right, let's get into it. Today, we'll ask the question, is this year's Bills roster better this year than it was a year ago? ESPN certainly thinks so. They ranked the Bills roster 9th in the league last year. The Bills come in at 4th overall this year, as Leo, the Bills fan, weighs in on YouTube. Bishop and Rapp would be a dream. And yeah, we'll get to that. And I think when it comes down to Cole Bishop and the rest of his competition, it just comes down to Cole Bishop staying healthy. I think the Bills know what they have in DeMar Hamlin, and they know what they hope to have in Cole Bishop. He just needs to remain on the field. But like I said, more talk about that later. Really what we're talking about here is the top half of the Bills roster when it comes to being ranked the 4th best roster in the league by ESPN. As I said, 5 slots better than they were a season ago. I think that's a fair ranking for the Bills, maybe a bit higher than I would have imagined. You have the Ravens, number 1. You have the Philadelphia Eagles, number 2. You have the Detroit Lions, number 3. Bills come in at 4. Chiefs, number 5. Bills are up there with the best teams in the league on paper. They don't have many holes. They have proven players at many positions, one of the best offensive lines in football, the reigning MVP. You have a player like James Cook on your offense, if everything works out with James Cook. We'll get to that later. And then you look at the defensive side of the ball, one of the top-tier linebacking cores in football, if it is to remain intact for the course of the season. You have a potential all-pro at cornerback. I know there's a lot to be answered on the other side of Christian Benford, but you have to love what you have there. Taylor Rapp has proven himself within this system. And then you have proven players along the defensive line with the additions that the Bills made, at least hope to have made this offseason, some unproven on the defensive line as well. So there's not many stars on this roster. You look at Josh Allen, you look at James Cook as a potential star, and then you have Tre'Davious White, Matt Milano, all-pros in their past, Taron Johnson, a second-team all-pro, Ed Oliver had a splashy year, Terrell Bernard, a rising starter in this league, but you don't have that true star power lined up and down the roster on the Bills. And that's why I honestly thought 4 may have been a little bit too high. But at the same time, throughout the landscape of the league, there aren't as many complete rosters as you look at the Bills, especially when you compare it to how complete the Bills roster is, as Joshua Williams commenting here. as a lot of people want to talk about Cole Bishop, and we'll certainly do that momentarily. And we'll do that right now. If Cole Bishop and all these other players are able to step to the forefront, that makes the case for a top 4 roster even stronger. You have so much young talent, untapped potential, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but also in your pass catching core. Dalton Kincaid going into his 3rd year, Keon Coleman going into year number 2. So there's a lot that could go right for this Bills team, and it seems like that's what ESPN is really projecting to happen for the Bills this year. And if you look at ESPN's rankings in terms of what they rated to be a Bills strength, what they rated to be a Bills weakness, I think they're pretty much on par with everybody's thinking in this circumstance. The greatest strength, obviously, is Josh Allen, the MVP quarterback, and the weakness is safety. If Cole Bishop isn't able to lock down that job, that's a key point of emphasis for the Bills within this defense, and they need Cole Bishop to step to the forefront, desperately need him. I termed this on a recent tweet that I put out, or post on X. So it's an interesting list to look at. Beyond the Chiefs, I'll give you the top 10. The Denver Broncos sneak in to the top 10 and all the way at 6. And if you look beyond their wide receiver core, the Broncos could be a very tough team, a team that the Bills played in the postseason a year ago, and they consider the Broncos' greatest strength offensive line, and yes, the biggest weakness, wide receiver. And the X factor for that team, really Marvin Mims. You saw that play out a season ago. And then you have the Washington Commanders, a team that came on with Jaden Daniels as its quarterback last year. The Los Angeles Rams at number 8, the Cincinnati Bengals at number 9, and the San Francisco 49ers at number 10. So when it comes to complete rosters, I mean, if the Bengals are rounding into the top 10, they're significantly weak on defense, as it proved out a season ago. So I think, for the more I think about it, a fair spot for the Bills to land in this ranking. I think it's interesting to project exactly where they are, but like I said, the untapped potential really has me coming around. I don't see the star power quite yet, but maybe after this year, a year or two down the road, some of these young players could really start to transform into those household names that you had in the past with a Micah Hyde, a Jordan Poyer, Tre'Davious White at the beginning of his career, and much, much more. Obviously, bring over Von Miller and others as well. But so that's how I see things with the ESPN rankings. And I mean, it's just laying out for the Bills at this point that these expectations are really going to take on a life of their own, especially the way the schedule is laid out. If they're able to get through that week 1 matchup against the Baltimore Ravens and go full steam ahead through weeks 7 or 8 before that matchup, I believe, with the Kansas City Chiefs, the expectations could really start to swell, and Bills fans could really start to smell that 1 seed, smell that home AFC Championship game and a potential Super Bowl appearance. And the way that the national media is laying it out, it certainly seems like that is the consensus. The Bills are a significant Super Bowl contender. But let's get to our first guest here, Josh Reed of WIVB and Channel 4. We'll get to part of my 53-man roster projection a little bit later. Perhaps we'll go through the entire thing. We also have Aaron Quinn coming up at around 9 p.m. So without further ado, we want to bring in Josh Reed and hear his thoughts on major storylines going into Bills training camp. All right, here with Josh Reed, sports director of Channel 4 WIVB in Buffalo and host of Bills Kickoff Live. Josh, big news. I was listening to WGR earlier today. I heard the big news broken there. I think Carl actually mentioned it when he was on with us previously. Take us into that decision to rebrand Buffalo Kickoff Live, now Bills Kickoff Live.
Yeah, so this is year number 9 of the show, and like all of us, it starts to show its age a little bit. So we did a little facelift this offseason. So we go from Buffalo Kickoff Live to Bills Kickoff Live. But the most important thing is it stays BKL, which a lot of the viewers kind of know it as BKL. And, Yeah, so looking forward to obviously we have the great partnership with the Bills being the official TV station and TV home of the Bills. So yeah, so it's now Bills Kickoff Live. It's going to be the same people that you've seen on the show before. Some different segments that we added to the show that we hope the viewers can appreciate and kind of wrap their arms around. But yeah, looking forward to it. The first show is our training camp special. That's coming up Thursday from 7 to 7:30. We'll be live in Rochester.
Be sure to be tuning in as we do every pregame and all the extra coverage that you ladies and gents provide throughout the year. But the big news outside of the rebrand at WIVB is Bill's training camp coming up in Rochester. We're going to have Thad Brown on of your sister station out there and also a member of Buffalo Kickoff Live. But you guys are set to go out there once again.
Bills Kickoff Live. Hey,
Bills Kickoff Live. I'm confused. I'm confusing myself at this point.
We're going to start a $1 jar. I told Carl today we're going to start a $1 jar, and every time one of us calls it Buffalo Kickoff Live, we throw $1 in the jar.
I have a feeling Perino is going to pull.
Well, yeah, you can count on him to mess it up, no doubt.
Yeah, for sure. But you're about to be headed out to Bill's training camp, and I was glancing through X, as many of us do on these fine summer afternoons, and I saw that ESPN came out with its list of top rosters in the league, ranking them 1 to 32 based on starting lineups. And they had the Bills at number 4, number 9 last year. They advanced them 5 spots, and that's a little bit different than the ranking of the weapons that they had come out a few weeks ago. I think they were down near the upper 20s. So a little bit more favorable to the Bills in this light, but it kind of surprised me. The Bills have a complete roster. They don't have many holes, but they're without that star-studded talent. And typically when you think of the best rosters in the league, you think of teams not only that are complete, but have that star-level talent. Are you surprised that they're ranked that highly? Do you think that this is a roster that is that far improved from last year?
I don't know if it's that far improved from last year, but I do think that this is a roster that is the sum of its parts are much greater than the individuals. Obviously, they have the reigning MVP in Josh Allen, so he's going to automatically boost your roster, right? Because you have one of the best, if not the best player at the most important position in the game. So that's going to obviously put you ahead of the curve immediately. But I do, I'll give you an example. I think the offensive line is a good example of that. When you look at their offensive line and that starting 5, Dion maybe is the exception. When you look at, top 3 at their position, maybe Dion sneaks into the top 3 at left tackle. But that offensive line is so good. I don't think it's a stretch to say it's one of the top 2 or 3 offensive lines in the entire NFL. But I don't know that there are a lot of individual players on that offensive line who you'd say are top 5, maybe even at their individual position, but they work so well together. And I think that's kind of a microcosm of the whole roster.
Yeah, for sure. It's really
I can't spell microcosm, by the way. I can't. I
think there's not an I in there. I always mix an extra I in after the CRO and the I think it's the S and the M.
I think there's a silent P in there somewhere. I don't know. Don't get me started.
No, but you're right. It's a sum of its parts situation. I think that's really what the Bills roster is. It's the sum of the parts. It's not. You do have the MVP, so it's tough to say that overall. But beyond him, and maybe James Cook, who I place a lot of value on this roster as well in terms of his game-breaking ability offensively, which really isn't replicated anywhere else in terms of offensive weapons. But it is a sum of its parts. It's really the overall lack of holes and the consistency up and down the roster rather than one guy standing out over the other. But I bring up James Cook, and he was a good soldier during the mandatory portion of the offseason program, missed the voluntary portion. There's still maybe some lingering doubt amongst the minds of some Bills fans what he's going to do come training camp. Will he hold in potentially? Will he be out there with his teammates as he was during the mandatory portion of the offseason program? How are you viewing the James Cook situation at this time? Do you think that's all in the past? Do you think he may have been trying to win over the Bills during some contract talks and appeared during mandatory minicamp, and now he may scale things back with the regular season approaching. How do you view James Cook's situation, and what value do you place on him on this roster?
Yeah, I mean, the value I place on him is pretty high. I mean, I think he is a huge part of what they do offensively. With that being said, he's not exactly your prototypical 3-down running back. I mean, he's not that guy. He doesn't get a lot of the touches that some of the really, really high, big money guys get. I do think he's so important to that offense. And I go back and forth on this. What's it going to look like on Wednesday? Is he going to be out there? Is he going to be full go? Is he going to be out there, but kind of out there walking around? Is he just going to be there, period, in street clothes? At the end of the day, I think he's going to be out there. I think that he's going to be full go, quote unquote. Yeah. But, I wouldn't blame him if he's like, I'm going to scale it back a little bit, because all it takes is, a big injury at training camp, and suddenly all that money goes out. All of the opportunity and money just goes right out the door. I'm not so sure that they have to be able to find a common ground here on the money. They do. James Cook is not a $15 million a year player. He's just not. And look, I think he is a really important piece of the puzzle. I think he's a really talented player. I think they'd be crazy to pay him $15 million a year. Is he a $12 million player a year? Probably. 11? Definitely. Now, you know how it is. There's ways to work the contracts to make it look like he's a $15 million player per year. Meanwhile, it's more like $11.5 million. And I think that it would be nice to see both sides kind of come to that common ground and find that. And maybe the length of the contract's a little shorter, but there's more money involved in it. Maybe there's more guaranteed money there for him. But the sooner it gets done, the better. It is an interesting dynamic, though, because if we show up Wednesday and he's on the field and he's full go, it really becomes a story just Wednesday. Mm-hmm. But if we show up Wednesday and he's not on the field, that story then goes to Thursday, to Friday, to Sunday. It drags
all the way to the first episode of Hard Knocks.
Exactly. It really drags out. Whereas he shows up Wednesday and he's full pads and he's out there doing what everybody else is doing. It's a story Wednesday that, okay, here he is. He showed up. Here's some more. And of course, Brandon's going to get asked about it on Wednesday. Sean's probably going to get asked about it as well. But then it kind of takes a back seat a little bit. But if he's not out there, it becomes a storyline until it's no longer a storyline.
Yeah, it's going to be a situation where we either see the flames fanned or we're going to see them be extinguished, whether or not he's out there, what his participation level is. And I think you make a good point with the money. And I mentioned his value on this team. I understand he's running behind one of the best offensive lines in football, as you said, and he does have the MVP at quarterback. So it takes a little bit of the pressure and the onus off of him on a play-to-play basis. But I always come back to with James Cook, and I spoke about it earlier on this episode, that it's his game-breaking ability that you really can't replicate within this offense, whether it be at the wide receiver position, the tight end position, or the running back position. Tre'Davious and Ty Johnson have shown flashes, but per play, James Cook gives you much better opportunity to break that play wide open and go for big yardage than any other player not named Josh Allen on this offense. And that really leads me into my next question with this wide receiver group and how you see things playing out there. I think you have the clear-cut number one, not a prototypical number one, in Khalil Shakir, and then you move to Keon Coleman, the number two wide receiver yardage-wise last year, despite the injury. So I think he's pretty well locked in his role if he's able to stay healthy. But beyond him, do you see it as a three-man race with Joshua Palmer, Curtis Samuel, and Elijah Moore for targets? Or is it Joshua Palmer and then Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel? Or, like I said, all three of those?
I see it as Joshua Palmer, at least initially. I think that's the guy that they've kind of earmarked to be that player.
Sure.
I really I think Elijah Moore is going to be the guy that we're talking about a ton during training camp. He looked really good in OTAs, mandatory mini camp. He looked good. He has a little different dynamic to him than a lot of the playmakers that Josh Allen has on the outside. He's put up pretty decent numbers considering the quarterbacks he's played with in the past. And now you give him the MVP and you go, okay, maybe there's a lot of untapped potential there with Elijah Moore. And in talking to him, I forget, it was one of the offseason workouts. Following the practice, had a chance to chat with him a little bit. And you could tell that his mindset's exactly what it needs to be to fit into that locker room. You can tell he's very much of the mindset that it sucks to play for the Jets and the Browns. Like, this is not fun. Like, it's like a rebirth, right? Like, here's his chance to live out the dream and play with the MVP and Joe Brady, this up and coming, not even up and coming anymore because he's established himself as a very good play caller in the NFL. And just, they've got things figured out inside the locker room when you can't say the same in Cleveland or in New York with the Jets. And things, the stability that he lands in here in Buffalo is huge. I still think it's Josh Palmer, that number 3. And then I think it's Elijah Moore. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want to talk about the playmakers on a whole, better believe the Bills would like Dalton Kincaid to be in that conversation. And they really want him to be a part of that conversation because right now, I think going into this year, he's the guy that's got to prove it. Like, he has got to prove something. He's got to do something. He's got to stay healthy. He has got a lot to prove to show that he's not – bust is too strong of a word because to me a bust is somebody who doesn't even make it onto the field and gets cut year 2. I don't think he's a bust. I think injuries, he's been unlucky with injuries. I think the talent's there. He's got to find a way to stay on the field. And he's got to make plays. When it's time to make a play, he's got to make the play. And you don't have to go back very far. All you got to do is go back to the Bills' last game. He's got to make a play. You're a first-round pick. You're not some guy off the street. Make a play. He's got to find a way to become one of those guys that Josh Allen can trust every game.
Yeah, I think bust, you're right, is too strong, but disappointment. He's trending toward disappointment territory. Sure. And if he built off that first year, I think we'd be looking at it a lot differently, even if it was an incremental build off that first year. But he took a dip, and injuries played a role. There's no doubt. But I'm with you on that final play of the Chiefs game. That kind of is a microcosm. See, we're really building here in our own right. It was a microcosm of his entire season. He just couldn't make the plays needed. Now, Josh Allen was on the other end of that, and a lot of off-target throws went his way down the middle of the field, and that's an area of that connection that really needs to take a step forward in and of itself. So there's a lot of blame to go around, whether it be on Dalton Kincaid, his health, or who was throwing him the ball, but you're absolutely right. If he doesn't take a step forward this year, even more so than Keon Coleman, being in his third year, being the piece that was supposed to come in here and take this passing game, albeit they scored 30 points per game last year, but take this passing game to another level. And I think he has the capability. It's just going to be interesting to see if he can stay healthy, build that play strength, I think they called it earlier this year, and see if that really helps him as he moves forward. Go ahead.
And age is a part of this equation. Yeah. When you're talking about, in particular, you kind of mentioned Keon there and Dalton Kincaid. I know there's only a year difference, right, as far as in the NFL, but age-wise, there's a huge difference. Keon is young. Keon is super young. Dalton Kincaid is not 22 years old. Like, I don't know his exact age, to be honest with you, off the top of my head, but he spent a lot of time in college playing college football. So you looking that up for me?
Yes. 25.
He's 25. So he's turned 26 at all during the season, or he's 25 for the season?
He is 25. You got Keon, who just turned 22.
Yeah. See, that's a huge difference.
Right. It's 3-4 years. And you're right.
Yeah.
Is this his age 25? It's his age 26 season, really, because he's going to turn 26 in October.
So there you go. I mean, he's 26 in the season. I mean, how many players do you go, oh, when they turn 27, that's when they'll figure it out? Not very many. This is a huge, important season for Dalton Kincaid. And for the Bills' sake, they kind of need him. They need him to figure it out and take that step. Look, I'm not talking about he's got to be an all-pro or even a pro bowler, but he's got to make that next step. To your point that you just made, be a little bit better than you were your rookie year, So now that would be taking 2 steps, because now you're way better than you were last year and a little bit better than you were your rookie year. I think that would be sufficient.
Yeah, they definitely need him. They need Keon Coleman. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later with Aaron Quinn of Cover One. A couple more questions here. I said 15 minutes, but we're going to go 20. This is great stuff. We're working through microcosm. I literally can't get enough. What about linebacker? What excites you the most about that position? Matt Milano, Dorian Williams, and Terrell Bernard, obviously not in that order, but that trio can be an extremely significant strength for the Bills if it's able to stay healthy. Now, Matt Milano has worked through a lot these last few years, and Dorian Williams is, let's be honest, he's nipping at his heels with his performance last year as the team's leading tackler. And I think you like what you have in Terrell Bernard, but he's encountered some bumps and bruises at some bad times over the years. So there's some things that need to come together with this group, but on paper, if it stays healthy, if it plays at its top level, this is a talented group. What do you like about this group?
Yeah, Matt Milano is one of the guys that I'm going to be watching a lot at training camp, because he's obviously a lot further removed from the injury. We saw at times last season when he was back on the field some splash plays where you went, that's what he used to look like. Yeah. And if he can get back to, I don't think we're ever going to see the 100% all-pro Matt Milano again, but if he can get back to 90% of that guy, I think their linebacking core is top 3-4 in the NFL. Like, they're just so good. That defensive line that linebacking core is really, really good. And I like the versatility there that they have, because they're very athletic. They can run sideline to sideline. They play pretty well in pass coverage. They come up and stop the run. And look, Dorian Williams, I really like Dorian Williams. I think Dorian Williams would be a starter on 25 teams in the NFL. I mean, I do. I think that because of Milano's injury past, that you've got somebody really solid that could slide in there if you need him. But Dorian can also slide in for Terrell Bernard. I think that Andreessen is probably when you look at the depth chart, would probably be slot in at number 2, because I don't think you can put Bale Inspector anywhere on the depth chart anymore. I mean, quite frankly, it's sad. He doesn't deserve it. Like, he hasn't been able to stay healthy enough to do anything, and they've given him ample opportunities. The guy just
I think they like the player.
I think they really like his talent. But at the end of the day, you have to be available. You just can't always be hurt riding a bike on the sideline. I really do. I like the way you can kind of move those pieces around a little bit in that linebacker room. What I think really will help the linebackers this year is what they did in front of them. They bulked up. They got some beef up front now on that defensive line, and that's going to keep the linebackers clean. That's going to allow Matt Milano to not have to worry about, an offensive lineman getting to the second level and getting his hands on him. Same with Terrell Bernard. And I really do think, and there's going to be times, I think, I don't know this, but maybe more this year than we've seen in the past. Maybe we'll see a few more 3 linebacker groupings and plays where we see all 3 of those guys out on the field. Now, I hesitate to say that, and that's only because I think Taron Johnson was the best players on the team, and that means you probably taken him off the field. And I never think it's a good idea to take one of your best players off the field, but I think in certain situations, having those 3 linebackers out there really, really is an interesting dynamic that an offense would have to look at and go, okay, now how do we attack that?
Yeah, I'm excited for this defensive line, and they better hope it's very much improved. They'll have to wait to get Larry Ogunjobi and Michael Hoyt back, but maybe that gives a little bit of runway for some of these younger players to step in and make a little bit of a name for themselves. So very excited for this group. We could go on and on. The cornerback, this, that, and the other thing. We'll get to more with Aaron Quinn. But I want to thank you, Josh, for coming on, spending some time with us. Tell the people where they can find the Bills Kickoff Live coverage digitally before or outside of your live broadcast on the air on Channel 4.
Yeah, so once again, Channel 4 Thursday 7 to 7:30, Bills Kickoff Live, as you correctly stated right there. Then you can go on our website, wivb.com, and if you have a smart TV, you can download the free app, WIVB Plus. We've got all kinds of content on there as well, so hope everybody checks it out.
All right, good stuff, Josh, and we hope to see you soon. Enjoy training camp, my friend. Build on that tan you already got cooking.
Yeah, spent a little time in Florida before this, so it was a nice little getaway, charged up and ready to hit Rochester.
All right, big thanks to Josh for joining us on the show. Great stuff from him. I know I cut him a little bit short. Didn't want him to brag too much about his recent Florida trip. I could use a little bit of a tan, but boy, we're having great weather in Western New York these past couple of days. The temperatures dipped a little bit. I know it's going to jump back up for those of you going to training camp. And before we welcome in, our next guest, Aaron Quinn of Cover One, I just want to touch on one thing that is posted within the header of this stream. Will there be another Buffalo Joe this year? And obviously, everybody knows the story. Joe Andreessen comes in for a tryout during rookie mini camp and parlays that into a spot on the team, and now looking to be a key cog this year after a very successful offseason program. And if you were to ask me that question before today, I probably would have told you no, but based on the Bills' actions via the NFL's transaction wire, a few workouts at the tight end position as Steven Stellanos, also Garrett Prince and Matt Sokol have worked out with the Bills at the tight end position. So I think if you were going to ask me in terms of undrafted free agents on this year's roster that have a chance to make the team, give me Kaliki Latu, who we saw catch a few passes during the offseason program. And he's got good measurements and he's got good speed, good athleticism, somebody who could potentially, and I use that word very, very with emphasis, with much emphasis, he could contribute in the passing game. I could see a route to him contributing in the passing game. The Washington product, the Bills building their group of Washington Huskies, I believe Edifon Ulofoshio of the University of Washington as well. But we're going to bring in our guest now as another big-time name in the Buffalo media sphere, gracious enough to join us here tonight, and that is Aaron Quinn of Cover One. I love the whiteboard behind you, and yeah, we are bros. We got to be golf bros soon, but right now, bros is good.
Yeah, man. I was going to say, you said you need to work on your tan. That just tells me you need to get out and get some golf in here, man, because the weather's been, honestly, you don't have to go to Florida to get that weather. We've had it here in Western New York the last couple of weeks. Today was a nice reprieve from some of that heat, but it's coming back. I heard Wednesday, Thursday this week is going to be hot again. So as the Bills report to camp, it's going to be hot out there. St. John Fisher here coming up this week.
Yeah, it's jumping up into the 90s, and I'm typically accustomed to building my tan this time of year. I don't think I'm going to get out to training camp as much as I'd like to this year. They installed that lottery, which made it tough for fans as well. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting look, a view from a different lens, but I'm excited to follow all the reports, as I'm sure that you are. And before we get into the crux of this conversation, do you have any comment on my previous thought that Kaliki Latu, maybe an outside chance, a depth tight end, to shock the world and make this roster? You look at the Bills working out these tight ends today, or do you see another name that strikes your fancy in terms of undrafted free agents?
In terms of the undrafted group, Wande Owens was intriguing to me a little bit, but that's
back out of New Hampshire.
Yeah, the back out of New Hampshire. I obviously love very adequate defensive backs. That's kind of my thing. So of course I go there first. I think this is going to be a really hard roster for even the late draft picks, undrafted guys. Greg and I just went through our position groups. We're on to cornerbacks here this week with our good friend Carl Jones is going to come on this week. And then we have safeties next week with Bruce Nolan. And then we wrap it up. But really, it feels like every single week we're talking and we're looking at this roster in each position group. The depth is really good. Brandon Beane has done a really nice job of building up the depth, even in the spots that we targeted as the weak links going into the offseason. He's really brought, I mean, you look at the defensive line and the number of names between free agency and draft picks that he's brought in, there's just not a lot of wiggle room. So some of these guys, maybe, obviously, I'd knock on wood, injuries plays a role in that, and who gets reps at camp. Hopefully we don't have to deal with all of that. And maybe if somebody really balls out in camp and makes a name for themselves. But I think a lot of these guys are probably really fighting for the practice squad.
Yeah, that's for sure. And there's going to be a lot of candidates for that practice squad because, like you said, it's going to be so hard for these fringe guys to make the roster this year. There's so many positions locked up. A few positions. Oh, look at John Robert is right there with you. Wande Owens.
Hey.
Commenter you see on many of these shows, very big Bills fan. And Joshua Williams says he'll be catching training camp on Hard Knocks, and a lot of us will be doing that. We'll talk about that to conclude this conversation. But I want to ask you another training camp-based question, and maybe kind of in the same vein as the last question. Do you see any surprise cuts coming? I know a lot is established. Money is going to play into this answer as well. Do you see any surprise cuts coming? I would think maybe they would have to come on the defensive side of the ball. I don't see many on the offensive, but maybe you see it differently. Any surprise cuts coming on either side of the ball in terms of veterans or rookies trying to make this roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think the offensive line group is going to be a little tight. I like Chase Lunt a lot, and so I think he moves a spot in. So I don't know if somebody moves out of that room. There's quite a bit of names, but nothing surprising there. I think I agree with you. It's most likely coming from the defensive side. The only thing that's probably going to benefit some of these guys is you do have the Ogunjobi and Hoyt suspensions in play. So maybe it's not a like prior to the start of the season cut, but a guy that's kind of just maybe going to fill a role until those guys get back. As weird as it sounds, because he's a recent third-round draft pick, I feel like Dwayne Carter is a guy that might be on the chopping block just from a numbers game perspective. It feels like a lot of what they brought in with Ogunjobi, with TJ Sanders, even Deion Walker sort of just kind of pushed him back in that game of musical chairs for reps. On the interior defensive line. I don't know if he's going to be able to showcase something early in the season when Ogunjobi's not available to be part of that rotation. Maybe he can solidify himself there, but it feels a little bit like a little disappointing last year. Didn't really gain the traction that I thought he would. I know it's only year one and going into year two. His body type's a little odd too for this team. I know the team likes his makeup, but to me right now, it feels like a little bit like he's on the outside looking in, and he's not the kind of guy where you can cut and probably get him back on the practice squad. It would be, you would have to make that type of move, and he would be on the outside looking in. Other than that, I think Balin Spector is a guy that a lot of fans would probably like to see, and probably not a surprise cut, but I think the Bills like him a lot more than fans like him. But I think that linebacker position in terms of also those special teams, defensive backs and stuff, there's going to be a lot of new faces in there that can play those roles on the special teams. And Spector hasn't shown that he can stay healthy. So I think they're going to probably want to get somebody with a little bit more availability. And I hate to say it because I'd love for the Bills to keep him. I've been a big fan of him. I think Damar Hamlin is another one of these guys that's on that bubble of, he's not really a special teamer. He's an adequate starter, but obviously everybody wants to see Colt Bishop take that step forward, have a healthy camp, become the guy that they drafted him to be. And if that happens with Taylor Rapp's availability has been in question too. So you kind of do want a good backup safety. That's going to be an interesting spot to watch. I don't know if you can keep a roster spot for Damar Hamlin as that backup. You kind of maybe hope Forrest can step into that role, or even a Jordan Hancock can step into it here year one as like a utility back. So those are the ones I'm keeping an eye on.
Yeah, you look at the offensive side of the ball. You mentioned offensive line, and I'm right there with you. I don't think it'd be a major surprise. He's not like a household name or anything, but maybe Ryan Vandermark struggles to get on this roster. We saw him pretty much passed by Tylen Grable in terms of that swing tackle role last year. So maybe he doesn't find his way. You mentioned Chase Lunt. There's some versatility there with his ability maybe to play a little bit of guard. So maybe some added versatility they like there. Then I look at linebacker, and I'm not sure what Edifon Ulofoshio has to offer at this point. I mean, maybe some special teams capability, but I don't think they're comfortable with throwing him out there on the field, even in a pinch. I think that would be a near disaster scenario. You look at the safety position. I'm with you on Hamlin. I struggled with that answer in my 53-man roster projection. I believe I went with Hamlin. I want to make sure. But it comes down to kind of finances there. As I've mentioned previously, it's, I think, $2 million costs you if they get rid of Hamlin, whereas if you get rid of Derek Forrest, and yeah, I kept Hamlin in my final 53. If you get rid of Derek Forrest, it's like $167,000.
Sure.
So that obviously plays into the conversation as well. But I want to focus on the defensive line next, because that's kind of what I was thinking about surprise cuts. I was thinking about Daquan Jones, quite honest with you. And I mentioned finances. It doesn't seem like he's a front and center candidate to be cut simply based on those finances. But maybe if you can find some trade value, you unload him that way. If, like you said, you like what you see from Dwayne Carter during training camp in the preseason. I know it's hard to believe, but I think Daquan Jones, what he's had to offer since he got injured early in that 2023 season, I think he's left a lot to be desired, and they've been searching for that one technique, and they're going to shift Dwayne Carter there, it seems, and Deion Walker's coming as well. I know he's got the back issue, and that might slow his progress, but if somebody's able to fit in there and really work into the rotation ahead of Daquan Jones, I think he could become immediately expendable. And we have a few comments here. Yep, John Robert agrees with me. Daquan Jones, Shaq Thompson. That wouldn't really be a surprise cut.
I think Thompson's going to be your like vet practice squad guy that they just kind of break in case emergency.
I have him on the 53, but I do have them cutting Spector and Ulofoshio. I just simply think Thompson would offer a little bit more than Ulofoshio. And then John Robert also says to Corey Couch, who I think he would be a surprise addition rather than a surprise cut. If they held on to him, that would be a surprise.
In terms of Daquan Jones,
Quentin Morris not on the roster anymore.
No,
Joshua Williams, but I do agree. Jackson Hawes for sure.
Yeah, I think that's your tight end 3. In terms of Daquan Jones, one thing that I think is going to work in his favor again is that Larry Ogunjobi suspension will probably help him, because you're relying on. And also I think you brought it up, the Deion Walker injury. Also, I think is going to be in play here. You heard Brandon Beane talk about they have a plan for Walker, and I think we'll start to see that here in training camp. If that's something that they're kind of limiting his reps early in camp, I think that will be an indicator for how soon we'll see him making an impact on the field. The other thing is, I talked about this with Anthony at MafiaCon when we were all there, was I actually think TJ Sanders, to me, I know like if you look at a depth chart, he's lined up behind Ed Oliver and a lot of people, he can do that, but I think he can play both. And I think that, when I look at him, I see a guy that can play a lot like what we saw Daquan Jones play when he was playing at his peak prior to that injury. And so I would like to see him getting some of those one tech reps, especially when Ogunjobi's not in the lineup, because I think Ogunjobi can also do that. But I think that the lack of experience behind him and the suspension of Ogunjobi plays into maybe the Bills being a little nervous to thin out that spot after they just added so many resources to it. And so I agree with you, like in the theory of, if he comes into camp and they're just like, he's just not going to get back to 60-70% of what we had seen prior from him, and maybe he's hit that age wall and we got to unload him here. I can see that scenario playing out, but I think that they want the veteran presence and that they're just probably a little nervous. Like, while it does look deep on a page, it's not as deep as you would think, especially that first 6 weeks with Ogunjobi being suspended.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more chance of Daquan Jones being cut would come after Ogunjobi comes back if Dwayne Carter has proven himself over the course of those 6 weeks and really fit in nicely to this Bills defensive line rotation.
To your point, maybe Dwayne Carter comes out and has a great summer.
Yeah. And it seems like they're somewhat counting on that. They're shifting him to that one technique. And I read it like this: a player this early in his career shifting the way he plays his position, not necessarily a good sign. I would think that would come as sort of, for lack of a better term, a panic move rather than something like, oh, we saw this last year and we want to try him at one technique. I just don't think it was working in terms of what he was playing last year, and they want to shift him over a little bit more inside. And we'll see how that suits him this year. Yeah. And if he's able to hit the ground running with that transition, things could certainly change. But TJ Sanders is going to make this defensive line come together. Really, whatever he's able to do and help elevate the play of others, I think that's going to be such a significant part of this defensive line. But let's shift over to the offensive side of the ball. What I think is really the most significant part there: Keon Coleman, Dalton Kincaid, and who is more likely to take that next step. And Josh Reed brought up such a good point that I hadn't considered this whole offseason, and that's Dalton Kincaid's age. He's going to be 26 years old in October, so it's really a now or never season for Dalton Kincaid. So I don't know if he's more likely than Keon Coleman to take that next step. I think I heard Dan Fates say that from Buffalo Plus that he's got more confidence in Keon Coleman to take that next step. But Dalton Kincaid, I think, has more pressure. Coleman's a young player, second year in the league, had a good rookie season before the injury, something to build on. Kincaid's got to bounce back this year in a big way. Who is more likely in your mind to take that next step?
One, I'll preface it with saying I'm not super high on Keon Coleman. I think he's pretty limited. He provides the Bills room with a different set of skills than most of the receivers. I think now that they added Josh Palmer, I think that might hurt Keon a little bit. I think Palmer's going to be a big part of this offense on the outside.
He's like Liam Neeson. He's got a particular set of skills.
He does have a particular set of skills, but Palmer, I think, can win on the outside in different ways that Keon doesn't, and that probably works pretty well with what Brady wants to do. So I think Keon, I think a lot of people are projecting Keon to do what he did when he was healthy in his rookie season and just get more reps because he's going to be into his second season. I don't know that this room is going to play out for that because there wasn't really anyone else that had his set of skills last year, where I think Palmer, Brandon Beane talked about it. They didn't pay him for nothing. They see a role for Josh Palmer in this offense. I think it's going to be a pretty substantial one. And so I think that kind of limits maybe some of the reps that we saw for Keon early, where nobody really does what I think the Bills want Kincaid to do. And I'm hoping Brady gets away from this idea of trying to force him to be a tight end, if that makes sense. Like, he is a tight end, but he's really a big slot receiver. And I think if they can use him more as a receiver, I know he's trying to put weight on, I know he's trying to do all that stuff, become a better blocker. I just don't know that that is who he is. He just, those are the things that you want to see the next step forward from him, and being a player that can be a plus blocker in the run game and can maybe take on a little bit more physicality in the middle of the field with linebackers. But when I went back and watched him, I did see a guy that wins a lot. I see a guy that understands zone coverages. I see a guy that was getting open. There's a huge kind of weird conversation that we have with players and statistics and things like that. If you go back and look, I think you talked about it with Josh when I was listening in, a lot of it was misconnections between Josh Allen and Dalton Kincaid. So that's two guys having to get on that same page. And I think if they connected 5-6 more times, the statistics look a lot different when you go look up the box scores. His season looks a lot different. Maybe he doesn't have the amount of touchdowns. I do agree with what Josh said. He's probably got to make more plays that are memorable to fans in big moments because he was such a high pick and you invested so much in him. But I do think he's close. I think he's right on the cusp. He had a dip in statistics last year. He tried to play through the injury. I don't know if that was the best idea. He actually got the injury on an overthrow from Josh Allen, another misconnection. But if some of those misconnections hit, I think I think that conversation we're having about him this offseason is an entirely different one. If you do look back to his rookie season, there was a lot of potential there. And I think he can get back at least to that production. And in the Bills offense, it's super weird, right? The production isn't necessarily the best way to judge some of these guys because it isn't everybody eats mentality. You have 5-6 guys. Josh likes to spread the ball around. Josh is going to eat up some of the statistics with his run game. James Cook is going to eat up some of these statistics, both in the run and pass game. And so those aren't always indicators of being able to say, hey, well, when you rank them to other tight ends, he didn't have as many yards or whatever. It's about when I turn on the tape, do I see a guy that can get open and win? I do. It's just a matter of, can he get that connection with Josh Allen and be maybe a bigger spot when the team needs a guy? It can't just be Khalil Shakir that's that safety blanket. I think Dalton Kincaid needs to be part of that safety blanket conversation too. And
it's it's a different position, but I think the touchdowns could really be the ultimate game changer for Dalton Kincaid in terms of the way that the fans view him. That the yardage and the receptions may never be to the level that we were projecting at the start of last season. We were projecting 100 receptions, over 1,000. That may never come for Dalton Kincaid. But if he's able to increase that connection or improve that connection with Josh Allen, as you mentioned, deep down the field, and then as we saw them during the offseason program, really work on that red zone connection between the two. If they're able to upgrade that, I think that could be obviously a total game changer for Dalton Kincaid, but really something that helps him elevate his overall game and take some of that pressure off the young tight end. So I think that's a really good question to look at. And I was inspired by a different podcast. Who is more likely to take that step? And I think if you were to ask me, I think I would go Keon Coleman, but I think the Bills need Dalton Kincaid to take that step a little bit more than Coleman, just based on how they use Kincaid, how much more often they use Kincaid than each one of their wide receivers individually, not named Khalil Shakir. So, and the final question I just want to leave you with, kind of the basis of this podcast, is the Bills roster better than last year? ESPN ranks them about 5 slots better. They're a better roster than the Chiefs in their eyes. The Ravens at number 1, and then the Eagles, the Lions, then the Bills. Does that ring true to you? There's not a lot of star power here, as I've mentioned before, but the depth is there. There's not a lot of holes and a lot of positions you can go 1, 2, more than that deep. So how do you view that in terms of the overall improvement of the roster from last year to this year?
Yeah, I do. I haven't done a lot of work on comparing the two rosters at this point last year, and a lot of it's projection, right? Like we're projecting that cornerback 2 is going to be better, even though we don't know necessarily who cornerback 2 is going to be. But if you would ask me this time last year, I would have thought Rasul Douglas was going to play like Rasul Douglas played the year previous. Obviously, he took a little bit of a step back and sort of kind of changed how that looked. And then obviously we saw Kyrie Elam come in at the end and make it look terrible. And so I think, again, to your point, depth, whether whoever wins cornerback 2, the depth behind it is better than it was a year ago. I think same with the interior defensive line. That was a huge flaw for the Bills roster last year. Again, a lot of projection going into that, but I do think that even with the projections, the depth is there, the amount of pieces that they got to fill that hole. Von Miller coming back from that injury and dealing with his suspension last year. You bring in Bosa. I think that people are projecting that production and volume that we're going to get out of the edge is going to be
He's like
better.
the forgotten man after missing the offseason program. Yeah. Not a lot of discussion surrounding Bosa.
Yeah, and I wasn't super high on him, but I think that he can at least provide that same level that we were getting from Miller, which I was happy with, right? Just not the contract, wasn't happy with. But I think you're also expecting a big leap forward from Greg Rousseau here. And so I think when you look at the depth, the offensive line, probably, you said there's not a lot of stars. I think the offensive line isn't a sexy position, but I think you have 2 of the best tackles in the game, at least top 5 in their position. Brandon Thorne, I think, had both Deion Dawkins and Spencer Brown top 5. So it's not sexy to have stars at that, but it is nice to have somebody to protect Josh Allen. And the line unit as a whole, I think, is a top 3 to 4 offensive line. So when you add all those things up, not a lot of teams have such a good offensive line. Not a lot of teams have a top 3 quarterback. That wide receiver room is probably questionable in comparison to others, but again, there's depth across. And so I think Brandon Beane's done a good job of building a roster that's deep and addressing his needs from a year ago. And remember, this team overachieved last year. That roster on paper wasn't a team that everybody was like, oh yeah, this is a team that's going to get to an AFC championship game. There was questions of whether or not they could win the division. This was supposed to be a reset down year last year. And I do think that they built on top of that roster here this year. So I agree with that. I think it is better.
Yeah, and I think what they have this year is that high upside potential, as you mentioned, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. It's kind of been status quo for many years. Last year was kind of a retooling year, and now they've fully given this defensive staff the weapons to work with and take this unit to an entirely different level. So it's going to be interesting to see who steps to the forefront over the next several weeks. We mentioned a number of names throughout both of these conversations, and I'll mention more of them after I let you go, but I'm really locked in on that defensive line. I know that cornerback 2 and safety are both starting jobs that are up for grabs, but it's almost more significant to what the Bills do to see who's going to work into that rotation. So
they got to get pressure on a quarterback. Yeah. They just couldn't get pressure on guys last year.
Yep. Greg Rousseau for SB Nation, I did an article of all the X factors in the AFC and the NFC, and Greg Rousseau was my X factor for the Bills this year. And if he's able to elevate his game, a lot of people don't see that in his game, and maybe I'm crazy, but I think he can elevate to double-digit sack potential, be up there with the league leaders. He's always up there in pressure. He's just got to be able to finish. And I think having Joey Bosa alongside him, if he's able to stay healthy, will help. But go ahead.
I think Greg Rousseau, we had Joe Marino on for our defensive line preview. He and I were raving about him. And I think we do look at sacks as an indicator of success for that position. But it's such a wonky thing. Like the difference between a 6 sack season and a 10 sack season sometimes can be inches. It could be just another guy getting a sack and not getting credit for it. Greg Rousseau is right there all the time, but he also is one of the better run defending edges. Sure. And his athleticism, he's growing into that position. He's not a guy, he's sort of the opposite of a Kincaid, where he didn't have a lot of college reps. He dealt with that COVID season. He was new to the position. I think he's growing into it. And havoc is a statistic that I look at a lot, and that counts in all the types of plays, fumbles, tackles for loss, all the things that kind of show how a player is impactful on defense. And he was a top 8. He was right up there with like Myles Garrett in terms of creating havoc. I'm not saying he's a Myles Garrett. He's not going to come out and get 18 sacks or whatever. But I do think he's probably in that next tier of guys outside of the elite guys, trending and ascending towards even better. I don't know where his ceiling is.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what he has to offer. I just think that with Rousseau, similar to Kincaid, he needs to make the big play in the big moment. You're right. If he doesn't get up to 15 sacks, 18 sacks, that's not the end of the world. But I think come playoff time against the Kansas City Chiefs and big games like that, you have to get the quarterback and you have to get him down on the ground in situations, because we've seen Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson escape and do so much with their legs. So
we saw Philly do it. We saw the blueprint is get after Mahomes. We've seen it before.
Yep. And you got to do it with that 4-man pressure. So yeah. Defensive line, a key cog in the Bills' overall machine. Aaron, tell the people what you have to offer on Cover 1 Buffalo with my man, Greg Tomsett.
Yeah, every Wednesday night, it's Greg and I going live. We got a few more position previews, and then we're jumping right into training camp. As you know, Alex, this is the toughest time here this last couple of months of being a content creator. News is slow, but the NFL is about to go full blast here. We're going to get tons of content as Bills fans from Hard Knocks, plus training camp, and then the season's going to be here before you know it. So you can follow us. And then every Sunday or whenever there's a game, live after the game, we do our post-game show, which is mostly a good time because the Bills win a lot more now. And so, yeah, catch us over there. And then we have a whole great crew at Cover 1. So make sure you're just following Cover 1, any of the social medias or YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Tons of great content creators. Really proud of that team.
Yep, Aaron was out with Anthony Prohaska for Cover 1 at Mafia Con this past weekend. Had a great time, and great time watching those guys as well. So, Aaron, thank you for joining us. We got to get you back on the show. It doesn't happen often enough, but I'm very grateful for your time, and enjoy the rest of the offseason. It's coming down to hours now. So
that's right. Let's go golfing soon, man.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be in touch, and thanks for joining me.
All right, thanks, man.
All right, Aaron Quinn of Cover One. Very, very grateful for his time here tonight. It is always good to be joined by those guys over there. They're so knowledgeable about stuff that I don't necessarily follow as closely as maybe I should have, with the salary cap with Greg. And Aaron is always coming through with advanced statistics. He mentioned the havoc, which is something that I'm not as well in tuned with as maybe I will be come mid-season. But it's just good to have a resource like that amongst the fan base, bringing as unbiased content to you as they possibly can. I'm sure their opinions aren't shaped due to their fandom, but when you're a fan, it's tough to separate that sometimes. Even being on the beat these past several years, it's been tough for me at times. So, but we do have a question here from Bob Burns. It's kind of unknown at this time, Bob. I will not be there full time this year. I'm just with Bills Digest, not with the Daily News. So the Bills decided not to credential just Bills Digest. So I'll be following along with a lot of you from beyond the sidelines and a lot of my colleagues' reports. And it's so valuable, along with Cover One, to have so many men and women that are experienced on the beat. There hasn't been much changeover on the Bills beat in quite some time. So it's going to be good to see things through a different lens and really get the bird's eye view of training camp rather than be locked in on specific position groups as I was on a given day-to-day basis. So it'll be interesting, but hey, we're going to bring you plenty of coverage right here on Buffalo Pregame throughout training camp and the preseason. But I want to finish this podcast off with my 53-man roster projection, which you can find in its totality on Bills, or in the latest edition of Bills Digest. And why don't we start on the defensive side of the ball with defensive line? And there isn't much question here, especially with Larry Ogunjobi and Michael Hoyt each suspended. But we mentioned Dwayne Carter already in terms of players that the Bills need to step to the forefront. They also need Javon Solomon to have a big season. I know I've talked about it previously with Pat Moran. I think he predicted 6 sacks or so from Javon Solomon, a very, very bold prediction. But you look at Joey Bosa, he's oft injured. Michael Hoyt being suspended. Landon Jackson already dealing with injury, placed on the PUP list as the rookies arrived at training camp. So the Bills are going to need Javon Solomon in some capacities, to begin the season. And he's shown the ability in the past to put up the big sack numbers, albeit at a lower level of football with Troy, his alma mater. But he has that knack for pass rushing that you just can't teach. Now, he does need to refine some mechanics. He does need to kind of learn the tricks of the trade, being a relatively undersized player. He's not a monster like Greg Rousseau by any means. So you're going to have to get a little bit more out of Javon Solomon in terms of his physical traits than you would a physical freak like a Greg Rousseau as you drafted him to be. So it'll be interesting to see what we get out of Javon Solomon. And I'll go through my list. I kept 5 defensive tackles, 5 edge rushers: Greg Rousseau, Joey Bosa, AJ Epinesa, Landon Jackson, Javon Solomon at edge, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, TJ Sanders, Dwayne Carter, and Deion Walker at defensive tackle. And there aren't any surprise cuts or tough cuts. It was pretty cut and dry at both of those positions. Let's move to the defensive backfield, and we'll start with the linebacker position. We brought this up already, and I mentioned how I have Edifon Ulofoshio and Balin Spector, 2 former Bills draft picks, being cut in my final 53-man roster, and I have them keeping an offseason signing Shaq Thompson, a veteran player that they got off the free agent pile from Carolina. You look at Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, Dorian Williams. We talked about it enough with Josh Reed. It's a great linebacker duo. I'm really excited to see what Joe Andreessen has to offer this year, if given the opportunity. We know he will on special teams, but if he's thrust into action, even briefly I'm excited to see how he's transitioned from year one to year two. We saw it during the offseason program. His processing seems to have taken another step. So I'm not excited to see Terrell Bernard, Matt Milano, or Dorian Williams get injured, but I'm sure there will come a time where the Bills are up big in a game. Maybe Andreessen gets some extra snaps. Excited to see him on the field in that capacity. Dalen Spector just injured too much. You can't count on it. I really think the Bills like the player. He has great athleticism. He's been put out there and been given opportunity to impress the Bills, but it always winds up in injury and couldn't even stay on the field throughout the offseason program when there isn't any contact to be spoken of. So Edifon Ulofoshio, as I mentioned, maybe a special teams candidate, but I don't think he's ever going to transform into a player that you can count on in a defensive capacity in terms of being on there in a significant role at the linebacker position. And then Keontae Jenkins, just no chance to make this roster. So perhaps two minor surprises there. Dalen Spector, Edifon Ulofoshio don't make it. I keep 5 linebackers with the big 3, Andreessen and Shaq Thompson. Moving to cornerback, a lot to be said here about cornerback too, but we've said it already throughout so many of these podcasts. It really comes down to the back half of this position. And you look at Dorian Strong, you look at Jamarcus Ingram, you look at Dane Jackson, and you look at Cam Lewis, if you consider him a cornerback. And it's going to come down to those 4. And one of those players is going to be the odd man out. There's also a chance the team keeps Brandon Codrington as its kick return, punt return specialist, but I don't anticipate he plays into the conversation at cornerback. So when you're looking beyond Christian Benford, Max Hairston, Tre'Davious White, and Taron Johnson, 4 players who I think are absolute shoo-ins to make this roster, you look at Jamarcus Ingram and Dane Jackson, I think they're pretty much on the same level of footing entering training camp. They're going to have to compete for a roster spot here. Dorian Strong, being a young player, I don't think you're going to be able to get him back on the practice squad with how pro-ready his cornerback mechanics seem at this point. He seemed comfortable out there during the offseason program. Maybe his athleticism isn't what Max Hairston's is at this point, but maybe ready to be thrown into the fire a bit more than Hairston this early in his career. So it's going to come down to Jamarcus Ingram and Dane Jackson, in my opinion, because Cam Lewis has that safety cornerback versatility. I think that's going to end up locking up that position for him. I have the Bills keeping 7 cornerbacks: Benford, Hairston, White, as I mentioned, Taron Johnson, and then Lewis, Ingram, and Strong, with Dane Jackson and Brandon Codrington getting cut. I think you're going to see them go with a combination of Ty Johnson, Ray Davis, perhaps Elijah Moore at kick returner. Maybe Elijah Moore plays into the punt returner as well. I think that's one position they're going to have to figure out, is punt returner, if they are to cut Brandon Codrington. I don't think that they're going to go with Khalil Shakir, paying him this offseason and putting him back there in harm's way time after time. So they may have to figure something out on the fly when it comes to punt returner, but I think kick return is the key this year. And with Brandon Codrington, I'm just not so sure he offers any type of versatility outside of that position, and it's hard to guarantee a roster spot to somebody like that. Although with the top half of the roster being so strong, I'm not counting out Codrington in any sense of the imagination. It's just how I see things. Dane Jackson is John Robert, great commenter here tonight. Dane Jackson on the practice squad. I could see that as well. Dane Jackson perhaps wanting to come back here. I believe he's got his veteran stripe, so I think he'd be able to choose where he goes if I have that correct. If not, somebody correct me in the comments. But that's how I see things at cornerback. A quick mention of Corey Couch. He had a good offseason, but not going to be enough, I don't think, unless he blows people away at training camp to vault him ahead of any of these guys in the cornerback conversation. You look at safety now with Taylor Rapp, Cole Bishop, DeMar Hamlin, Jordan Hancock, Derek Forrest, really competing for 4 spots, in my opinion. Wande Owens was brought up by Aaron Quinn and somebody in the comments earlier, but don't think he has a chance to make the team. Maybe a good spot on the practice squad coming for Owens. The Bills didn't sign Derek Forrest for no reason. I think that was a double negative. So let me rephrase that. There was a reason why the Bills signed Derek Forrest. And that's obviously to compete for this job. And I think they like what they've seen from him, especially on special teams. I think they would love to bring him in here as a veteran backup, somebody who's played a role on a team previously and could potentially come in here, learn the system, and compete on special teams. But in terms of that starting role, I really think it comes down to Cole Bishop and Damar Hamlin. And Bishop's going to have to be limping out of training camp in order not to have that starting role entering the preseason. You're also going to have to sharpen his skills during the preseason. So interested to see how much he would play there and to see if he can come out healthy from a preseason slate. But I think this is pretty much gift wrap for Bishop. I don't think there's much chance for Damar Hamlin. I don't think it would be an ultimate disaster if Damar Hamlin won this job. Like many people think. I think the Bills are desperate for that increase in ability that Cole Bishop has the potential to bring at the safety position. But Damar Hamlin's been consistent, and I don't think that what he has to offer is practice squad level. I think it's beyond practice squad level. It may be replacement level. It may be better suited for a backup role, but Damar Hamlin is as hardened in this system as any player on this roster. He may be the longest tenured player, I believe, in this secondary. Yeah. I believe we determined that last year. I mean, you bring back Tre'Davious White, so that's something to consider. And you think about Taron Johnson, so I'd have to look at that. But you look at Damar Hamlin and his experience and the consistency that he brings. He may not bring that athletic ability, that hard-hitting ability, and Bishop certainly the higher ceiling, but I'm not one who would be ready to jump off a bridge if Damar Hamlin wound up being the starting safety for this team. And then Jordan Hancock, another young player, in a similar vein as Dorian Strong. I just don't think the Bills are comfortable in cutting him and risking not getting him back on the practice squad. This is a player that Bobby Babich, during his offseason comments, laid out, maybe not laid out, but hinted at a laid out plan for Jordan Hancock to earn a contributing role on this team. And it could come as the team's nickel cornerback, perhaps in the future. Taron Johnson is getting long in the tooth, maybe a step back incrementally last year. It's interesting for me to see how they use Jordan Hancock come training camp. He could be listed as a cornerback or safety. I have him as a safety. So I have the cuts at safety, Derek Forrest, Wande Owens. And then on special teams, I have Jake Camarda winning the punting battle over Brad Robbins. Obviously, Reed Ferguson and Tyler Bass. We're not going to go into detail here. But Camarda really had some strong performances as a member of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers before taking a dip in his net average in his final season with the team before being released. So I'm going to go with Camarda. Brad Robbins really hasn't shown anything. We didn't see anything in the offseason program. So kind of flying blind here. I'm going to go with Camarda at the punting position. So that does it for defense and special teams. And why don't we quickly go through the offense, because there really isn't a whole lot to discuss here on the offensive side of the ball. I have Mike White winning the backup quarterback battle against Mitch Trubisky. You save a couple of $1,000,000 if you part ways with Trubisky, so that's going to play a role here. And I just think White gives you more high upside in a backup. Trubisky, very gun shy is what I've seen from him these past few years. So very uninspired by Trubisky. I'm intrigued to see what White has to offer. It's going to be a good battle here during training camp and the preseason between those two quarterbacks. We know Josh Allen doesn't get much time during the preseason. They're going to try to keep him clean during training camp as well. So White and Trubisky vying for snaps as the team's backup, and I have White winning that battle per se. At running back, James Cook, Ty Johnson, Ray Davis, Reggie Gilliam. Nothing to see here. Frank Gore Jr., Darrington Evans. The Bills will hope to get both back on the practice squad. At wide receiver, perhaps a surprise here. Jalen Virgil, I kept as my sixth wide receiver. I think his special teams ability may not come in terms of a return man, but a tackler, somebody who they can rely on. I believe in punt coverage and kick coverage, so Give me Jalen Virgil. He also impressed me with his pass catching ability during the offseason program. So Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Joshua Palmer, Curtis Samuel, Elijah Moore, pretty much locks to make this roster, in my opinion. And then Jalen Virgil, Laviska Shenault, Tyrell Shavers kind of battling for that last potential roster spot. And I'm going to give it to Jalen Virgil in this 53-man roster projection. At tight end, I do have Jackson Hawes making the roster, Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox, obviously, as well. I'm going to go into the season believing that Hawes is going to be that jumbo tight end for this team. You saw Alec Anderson do a good job in that role, but Hawes presents more of a threat in the pass catching game or in the passing game, and we saw him present that threat during rookie minicamp particularly. So very intrigued by Jackson Hawes' ability. I don't think he's going to play a major role and take any snaps away from Dawson Knox or Dalton Kincaid, but could take some snaps away from Alec Anderson, who we saw play, I believe, 30% of the snaps a season ago. I don't want to give out any accurate information, but I'm going to think that I'm right on that, and I'm going to run with it. I should have included that in this right-up here. It's on me. It's on me. I got to take a lap. But that's how I see the tight end position. Zach Davidson, Kaleki Latu, and maybe one of these wide receivers they worked out factoring in to the practice squad. Finally, the offensive line. I'm going to cut Chase Lunt. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the roster, but I'm going to remain loyal here to Ryan Vandermark. I think the Bills will too. Cedric Van Pran Granger, Tylen Grable, Alec Anderson also in terms of backups here on the offensive line. 9 offensive linemen, the starters, Deion Dawkins, David Edwards, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, and Spencer Brown. So that's how I see things in terms of the 53-man roster projection. Thank you for sticking with me. You can find my analysis in its totality within the latest issue of Bills Digest. You can log on to billsdigest.com to subscribe. 7 issues throughout the year. Had our pre-training camp issue come out. We'll have our preseason issue come out. So this is a great time of year to subscribe to Bills Digest. Please also subscribe to the podcast. Like this podcast on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Subscribe on YouTube, and also subscribe to the Buffalo Pregame with Alex Brasky Substack page. I'd like to thank you for joining me on this episode of Buffalo Pregame. It's been another exciting episode to tune into. And yes, Alec Anderson, 27% of the snaps for the Bills. I knew I had it in this write-up somewhere. So looks like Jackson Hawes may have a chance to take that number right out from under Anderson's nose this year. But we'll see how it all plays out. Another episode of Buffalo Pregame coming up on Tuesday night. We have Thad Brown joining us, news director of Channel 8 in Rochester, another host of Bills Kickoff Live. And I think we're also working on another guest, but I don't have it listed here. So stay tuned for the promo. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.